Hello everybody, thank you for joining. Just give me 1 second and I'll stop the intro video. There we go. So, welcome to Apprenticeships and Vocational Learning, Transforming the Learning Experience with iPad. Thank you very much for that snappy title, Academia Marketing. I am James Dancer. I'm Technical Director at Academia Group, and with me, if his camera and mic are working, I have Professor Darryll Bravenboer. And I'm going to take a breath before I say all of these, who is Director of Apprenticeships at Middlesex University, Professor of Higher Education and Skills at Middlesex University, and Chair of the Police Education Consortium. Hello, Darryll.
Hello, good morning, and good morning, everybody.
Hey, there we go. Mic is working. That is all good. So a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. So if anything goes wrong, you might notice the room reload. I've got a panic button that I can hit if stuff stops working for whatever reason. So you'll see a bit of a spinning wheel and it will take us into a new room. So if that happens, don't worry. It'll pick it back up again automatically. So a note to make before this, we have done a pre-recorded version of this that'll be a little bit longer and go into a bit more detail than this this chat today. That will be coming soon, and you'll all be sent the link. So there is more detail to this, but this one is more of a chance and an opportunity for you guys to get a bit of brain time with Darryll, because as we know from organising the preps for this, Darryll's time is very limited and he has an absolute wealth of knowledge on all the topics we're going to discuss today. So we don't have any slides. We're not going to bore you with PowerPoint or anything like that. This is a chat and an exploration. So on that basis, please make sure you're asking questions when you have them. And as a few of you have already, please feel free to use the chat. If you haven't been on a webinar with us on this platform before, there is a couple of different modes that you can use in chat. So if you just type a comment and hit enter in the bottom, then that will just send a chat message. But you'll notice a little bubble just to the top right of where you write a message. If you click on that, it will say chat mode by default. That will then change to Q&A mode. And what that does is it puts a little red Q next to your message in the chat. So when we get to the Q&A at the end, Darryll and I will know which questions we've answered, what is a question, what is a chat, etc. So please make sure you're using that feature. If for whatever reason you forget to do that, you can then change that after the fact. There's a little bit of there's a little circle next to your message in the chat window. You can click on that and that will put a Q next to it. And if you completely forget to do all of that, we have Ryan and Kibler from our marketing team moderating the chat. And if they notice a question that hasn't been marked as a question, they will do that for you. So please feel free to do that as we go. We've got to kind of judge how much to talk and how much time to leave for questions. So if you can ask any of your questions in line, that would be awesome. And we can sort of adjust that accordingly. And then we will come to Q&A at the end. One last point to mention before we get into stuff that isn't housekeeping is there is a 10-second delay between when Darryll and I are talking and you guys hear it. That is to allow Ryan to cut the feed if I say anything I shouldn't, but that hasn't happened yet. So might be a lucky day, Ryan. You never know. You might get to cut me off. But what that means is if you ask a question, there will be sort of a 10-second delay from when you've thought of asking the question from what we've said to you asking the question and then us answering it, which means real-time dialogue can be a little bit awkward. So if you're chatting to us and you're asking a question, please make sure you're putting sort of as much detail as you want in there. Otherwise, there'll be a bit of a gap between sort of question and response. So I think we can get into it now. That's enough housekeeping for anybody. So, Darryll, would you like to just sort of give us a bit of an idea about the Police Education Consortium, what it is, what it functions as, how it was conceived?
Yeah, sure. So it really it responds to a kind of major transformation that's happening nationally with police forces in the country. The College of Policing has introduced something called the Police Education Qualifications Framework, which basically means that whereas previously police training would have required that people achieve something at level 3, the equivalent of A levels, changing that through to something where they have to achieve graduate professional status. So transforming basically a level 3 profession to a level 6 profession. And that's a major sort of change. And as a consequence of that, there are 3 new kind of entry routes that are being introduced, 3 ways in which you can become a police constable. One of which is having what they call a pre-join degree, which is a university course accredited by the College of Policing, which has the College of Policing's curriculum embedded within it. And you do that and you can enter the police force that way. Another one is what's called a degree holder entry program. So people who've done a degree, they do a kind of conversion course and then they can enter the police. Again, that's a level 6 degree level qualification that they get. And then the last way is a degree apprenticeship program, so the police constable degree apprenticeship. And that is where they are employed as student police officers. They undertake the training while operating as student officers. And after 3 years of that degree apprenticeship, they will be fully qualified, professionally recognised police constables. So that's all of that, doing all that in quite a short space of time is a massive kind of transformational change across the country. And a number of universities, the universities that are involved in the Police Education Consortium, which includes Middlesex University, the University of Cumbria, University of Portsmouth and Canterbury Christchurch University, all have a kind of background in policing. That's, you know, some of those organisations involved in what's called the Higher Education Forum, which actually, you know, informed the development of the College of Policing going back then. Institutions involved with the Trailblazer Group that developed the police constable degree apprenticeship. So a lot of, you know, really steeped in police education. And so we're all interested in, you know, getting involved in this massive transformational initiative. And so we decided that we'd collaborate with each other. And in collaborating, we'd actually develop provision in advance of getting any contracts. We'd work together to make something that would be a real offer that would help this transformation happen. And that's quite unusual, actually, within the higher education sector for universities to collaborate so closely, because it's normally, you know, the kind of invented here syndrome. Each university wants to do their own thing, and we think it's better than another university. It's quite competitive in that way. So actually getting people to collaborate was quite unique. But I think it's the fact that it's so transformational and so interesting and so innovative that kind of we're all steeped in it, that we've kind of really got enthusiastic about working together in this way. And so having done some of that pre-work, we then wanted to sort of bid, because it's a procurement process, to bid for some of the work that was out there. And the consortium was lucky enough in winning bids for delivering policing provision for Surrey, Sussex and Hampshire police forces. And so subsequently, you know, we've been working in partnership with those forces to develop curriculum for both the police constable degree apprenticeship and the degree holder entry program. And one of the interesting things about the requirements of the College of Policing is that, you know, a university or a group of universities can't just say, oh, we've got this program, you know, we're going to deliver it to you, and that's our offer. We have to work hand in hand with the police forces to develop the curriculum and to develop the particular approach to delivering the curriculum with those forces, because the license for delivering those programs is issued through the police force, not through the university. So it kind of forces you to work in very close partnership with the forces. So the employer and the provider are hand in hand, and necessarily so. And that's been really kind of interesting to see. I mean, we've worked with the police forces over many, many months to develop this kind of the approach that we've established. And it's been a really, really kind of innovative and productive process.
So what would you say the biggest challenge was with all of this? Because I remember sort of being part of the process, and there were so many people involved originally, lots of sort of requirements, responsibilities, etc. So what was the biggest challenge you faced in sort of bringing that all together?
Well, I mean, we had to be very organised. We had to get all the universities in a room, all the various people from various people across the various departments of the universities, from the quality department, from registry, from the faculty, you know, from IT departments, from every aspect of provision across the 4 universities had to be aligned, because this was one consistent offer that we were developing. So it had to be consistent across the 4 universities. And each university has their own regulations, procedures, and so forth. So we had to do a lot of work to align those things, just so that our offer was consistent. And in the context of doing that, we're actually, you know, in a live way, creating the curriculum as we're going. So we're creating the context for the provision by, you know, aligning all our regulations and procedures at the same time as we're developing the curriculum that we're going to deliver. And not only doing that across the 4 universities, but doing it with 3 police forces at the same time, each of which has their own culture and different, you know, traditions and practices in terms of how they deliver police education. And not only that, we're also working with the College of Policing, because the whole thing has to be also not just approved by 4 universities, who are the awarding bodies for the qualifications, but also has to be approved by the College of Policing. So we're meeting a whole different set of requirements and so forth. So it's a hugely complex, kind of very elaborate scheme that has to be put in place. And we had to be really, really organised. And I have to say, the amount of kind of goodwill, you know, that was needed to make that happen was you know, immense, really. And I mean, it's testament to the fact of the excellent working relationships between all of those parties that we've been able to sort of put in place what we have.
Yeah, as I said, I can remember some of those meetings. It was going into the room was quite daunting, because you had, I think it was between 20 and 30 people in one of them. And the challenge there was making sure, as you said, all their requirements are met. But the main thing that came across to me in that was that there was a real will to succeed from everybody. There wasn't anybody that was trying to massively push their own agenda. There wasn't anybody that was, as you said at the start, it can get quite competitive sometimes. There was a real kind of air of collaboration right from the start, and that for me is one of the main things I think that would have made this so successful, because everyone was driving towards the same thing, which is great to see. So, you know, you ultimately arrived at the decision to go digital with this, and chose the iPad as the device to do so. What were the reasons behind that? Because that was a couple of years ago now. It was before, you know, things like coronavirus and having to do remote working and learning, and that was quite sort of, you know, there's an element of foresight there. So what drove that decision?
Yeah, well, it's interesting what you said about that kind of collaborative working, and having that shared vision. All of the university partners that were involved had an appreciation and understanding of work integrated learning. For example, if you're talking about the delivery of apprenticeships, then, you know, best practice in the delivery of apprenticeships is about integrating on and off the job learning. An apprenticeship is a job with training to industry standards. Okay, so, you know, part of your job is the learning that takes place to enable to develop you professionally. You know, that's part of your role. And so it makes complete sense to think about that in a wholly integrated way. I mean, there are different ways in which traditionally people have reached professional status. So, you know, a sequential way where you do some of the knowledge stuff before, and then you go into practice, and then you become competent. Or a parallel way, which you're in work developing some practice skills, and then you go on a day release course in parallel to that, and eventually those two things come together and you're competent. But a work integrated way means that your practice, your day-to-day work activities are a source of the knowledge and the learning that you're undertaking, and that you're seeking to maximize opportunities for extracting and sort of benefiting from the learning that's available within that learning environment as a major resource for that learning experience. So it's a very kind of different approach, and having that in mind made us, you know, think very early on, actually before we had any contracts, that we would have a work integrated approach to delivering the provision. And we thought that was what was required, because, you know, student officers, they're going to be in the community, they're going to be, you know, in different policing environments and contexts, and they need to be able, if they're going to be able to learn from their experience in those contexts, then we need to think about kind of mobile learning solutions so that they can capture that learning, you know, more closely to that the extent to which the experience took place. So, you know, we were thinking very early on that we wouldn't have any kind of hard separation between, we'd have people, you know, bust into a lecture hall, we deliver some lecture knowledge stuff, and then they go back into the environment and then apply that stuff. That's not the model at all. It's actually that, you know, we're you know, the primary site for learning is the workplace. That's where knowledge and learning is generated, and we reinforce that with, you know, various learning materials and resources and references and we contextualize that learning, but we're seeking to, maximize the learning from that environment as our starting point. And so to do that, we really needed a mobile digital learning solution, and that's really what informed our thinking early on.
Yeah, so we had there was a lot of discussions early on about sort of device type and what and why, etc. And I know there were obviously some hearts and minds to win about using a digital device for data that was ultimately going to be police data in some form. So what drew you guys to the iPad for that specifically?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I mean, actually, the police forces that we were working with hadn't, as forces, as organizations, had an experience of using Apple devices before. So actually there was a little bit of resistance to that because, people like what they've used previously, they're invested in it. That's the normal way things go. And you're also right in saying that they were very, very understandably security conscious. So there was a lot of need to kind of reassure people about how things would be secure, where data would be stored, etc., that it would be, within the UK, etc. And those early meetings with, some people who were skeptical about that were absolutely crucial to establishing their confidence that, a device like an iPad could be managed in a secure, kind of seamless way, and that it would be something that wouldn't require, the need for a massive, array of retraining of their staff, retraining of all, adaptation of new systems and procedures and so forth, in addition to what they already had, which would create additional security risks and so forth. So a lot of the solutions that were able to be found in terms of the kind of managed solution, which I think is really kind of important, meant that we can present this as something that is not a challenge to any kind of existing practice, but is kind of something that can be introduced seamlessly and securely at the same time.
Yeah, and there were two main standouts for me in those discussions. Obviously, security was one big one, and I won't go into it now because I can't even remember the maths I did behind it, but I think I'll go into it in the pre-recorded video. But one statement that stood out in that meeting is how easy is it to crack the encryption on an iPad? And that was, I think we probably spent about half an hour talking about that in one of the initial meetings. And I think the TLDR, the kind of end of that discussion, was something along the lines of the inevitable heat death of the universe would occur before you could mathematically crack the encryption on an iPad in a normal situation. And as you said, I'm sure there's some mathematicians that can do the maths and prove me either wrong or like way off, and it's way further than that. But the point is, it's not an easy thing. Even if someone, a bad actor or someone with malicious intent gets hold of a device, it's not like they can just try a PIN code a few times and get in. And I think that was some of the concern that was coming from the police forces. And one of those, the big part of that was things like mobile device management and being able to enforce passcodes, being able to remotely wipe a device, all of that kind of stuff. And we can go into that in a little bit as well. But the other thing was accessibility. So I remember there was a discussion about dyslexia, for example, and what features iOS could have that would help that, because there's a large number of dyslexics in the police force, just as in the general populace. And things like being able to change the color hue of the screen is one big thing, and being able to do that remotely and being able to do it contextually for a specific user, and also use things like Bluetooth accessibility devices like Bluetooth hearing aids and things like that as well. So I remember those being huge discussion points, and the feature set that iPad has in relation to everything else was way above and beyond. So I actually thought it was going to be a longer security discussion, but it was probably a longer accessibility discussion that we had in one of those sort of initial decision-making meetings. So all of that in mind then, from a teacher and a learner perspective, what does that user experience look like in the Police Education Consortium?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing to say about the user experience is that for the student officers, they receive a shiny new iPad out of the box, which is completely set up for the purpose of supporting them with their professional learning straight off. They just sign in and they're ready to go. And that's a seamless, user experience from their point of view. but there's a lot of work that's obviously gone on in the background to make sure that the right apps are loaded. So there's a lot of, the work between the curriculum development teams and yourselves to make sure that we've identified the right apps, the right links and so forth, so that everything is ready for them to go. And of course, that needs to be monitored centrally and so forth. But in terms of the users, they don't even notice. They just switch it on each day, and it's uploaded, with the new stuff, that they need for the next module or the next experience or whatever. So that kind of seamlessness of user experience is kind of really, really important, because it means that people are not, having to sort of get frustrated and, bash the front of their screen thinking, where is this thing I need? I can't find it, because it's just automatically there. Yeah, so that makes a huge difference, I think, in being able to encourage people that this is part of their day-to-day work activities. This device is just something they have with them as a student officer. I think it's also kind of an opportunity to help them realise that this is a device that's supporting them with their learning. They are student officers. They are part of their job role is to learn, and this is the device that will help them do that. So it positions them in that way. They understand that that's what it's for, and they understand that the relationship they have with it and how that relates to their particular job role, and how that then positions them as a student of one of the consortium universities that we're working with as well, because that's an important kind of signal for people that I'm a student police officer, I'm an apprentice, or I'm on another program, but I am also engaged with the kind of university higher education experience, and I'm going to get a degree at the end of this thing. So that's also important. So all the support mechanisms that would go around a normal university experience, access to the library and everything else, is also facilitated through that mobile learning device. So that's part of it. In the kind of operational sense, if you think of an example where a student officer, might be with a more senior officer in a community policing environment, and maybe there's some incident or moment that happens, and there might be that's a kind of really rich kind of learning opportunity. And perhaps there's a discussion between a student officer and a more senior, police constable. And that might be kind of instructive in terms of their own professional development. So the ability to be able to whether in the police station or in the back of a police car, to record that their personal reflections on that as a contribution to their professional learning is kind of really valuable. It's fresh, it's in the moment, it's right there. They can capture it. And indeed, they can engage with, if they've got opportunities, they can engage with other kinds of aspects of learning, some of the structured learning opportunities that are available through the iPad device in those kind of settings. So those kind of things are really important. Other things that are really important for example, for some of the staff, that with apprenticeships, and we also do this for our degree holder entry programs, there are things called tripartite reviews. So they're kind of developmental sessions looking at each individual learner's progress and how they might develop their learning further. And they're three ways. So they're an employer or a police force representative, a university representative, and the apprentice or learner as well. And so it's a really kind of powerful interaction between those three groups of people, talking about learning opportunities. And so how then do we, when we meant to have these regularly, sort of every 12 weeks for each individual apprentice, so there's a lot of organisation that needs to go on in that. So we use our apprenticeship and learner management system, which is called Aptem, to schedule and plan all of those review sessions with all of the parties concerned. And actually we can facilitate those through Zoom technology, which is embedded through Aptem, so that they can, they're using the iPads to basically conduct those interactions, rather than having to book a room, get people out of various kind of shifts and all trying to coordinate the logistics of that. They can do it all kind of wherever they are. And that's made a huge difference in terms of trying to organise those things as well. So that's helpful for the staff that are supporting apprentices within the police forces. It's helpful for the employers, and it's helpful for the learners themselves. And one thing we haven't said, of course, is that these student officers, never actually, are required to visit the university campuses. All of the delivery of this stuff is within either in the community or within forced premises. So there's logistics in terms of getting university staff to those premises, which are actually facilitated through the mobile learning device, through Aptem and other systems.
Awesome. So you decided to go with a fully managed service for this from us. So this isn't a pitch or anything like that, but I think it gives context. What made you decide to do that rather than sort of do it in-house or sort of form a collaborative team to do that yourselves?
Well, I mean, Middlesex University are the lead provider of the consortium. So, as an apprenticeship provider, with a lead provider, and so it would be beholden on us to do all that stuff. So, actually Middlesex University's IT department were quite keen that, we had a solution that wouldn't involve us requiring lots of different resources and systems and procedures and so forth to make this happen. So the fact that there is a ready-made solution for that is everything everything is managed through the cloud is a real selling point for this whole initiative, really. There are kind of logistics involved in terms of getting iPads to the various locations for the various forces, but that's also kind of managed seamlessly as well. And having the opportunity for kind of if repairs are needed, returns, if things get damaged, that's all kind of built into the package. So that kind of holistic, total kind of managed service stuff was really appealing for Middlesex, but also for the general consortium as well. And I think has really enhanced the kind of feeling of seamlessness of the whole initiative.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy as an organisation to kind of want to keep stuff in-house by nature, because we look after technology, so we're looking after this technology, and the whole message we try to give to people we speak to is that's fine. You can still be in control, if you like, of the direction, but you don't necessarily have to own the day-to-day to make it work, and that's basically what we're here for. We're here to help in those scenarios. So for everybody's benefit, just to know what we actually do and how the devices sort of work in situ, is, as Darryl's alluded to, everything is kind of zero touch, and the fun, I guess, let's call it fun, of the complexity of that was having the ability to deploy a device to basically any police station that could be in any of those locations and have it work correctly without lots of faffing and without lots of touching was a huge point to get right. And that's bearing in mind, having to get the device on a secure Wi-Fi network within a police station, in multiple police stations, and making sure the right thing ends up in the right place. So that was one big thing, but we're in a position where we can literally ship a replacement device or a new device and it just comes out of the box in the police station and it's turned on. It goes through that nice zero touch stuff. The other thing that was quite a big point for the police forces and for the universities concerned was web filtering. So those devices are filtered wherever they are. So it's based, web filtering service is based in our cloud, which is in the UK. So again, as Darryll said, big sort of point there about where the data resides. So the fact that this is all done, all the filtering, logging and etc. is in UK based data centers was a huge point. But those devices are filtered on or off network, obviously, because if they're out and about, they still need to be filtered. Admittedly, the rules for filtering the kind of stuff that a police officer needs to look up on a daily basis are a little bit different to what you would normally get in that kind of scenario. So there was a bit of a process of figuring out what was, what was appropriate content, what was inappropriate content, and getting all of that kind of stuff done. But as Darryll said earlier as well, we also handle, ironically, for the police force, the lost and stolen process for devices. So things like being able to remotely lock a device, push notifications to it, be able to remotely wipe if we need to, and do sort of device recovery and replacement, again, was a thing that had to be worked through with all of those different organizations needing to be happy. But we're now in a point where it is just, I don't like using this phrase, but one of my colleagues does, but it's kind of an industrialized process. So there is no fiddling around when the new device needs to go out to someone or a device needs to be replaced. It's just now part of the process. And that sort of touches on that seamlessness of the experience that Darryll mentioned a minute ago. because that's key, really. You don't want the technology getting in the way of the day-to-day. It should be the thing that just kind of works. Same kind of thing as when you go to, if you're buying a device personally, you go to an Apple store, you get it home, you get it out of the box, you put in a couple of details and it's ready to go. It needs to be the same experience in education, in enterprise, in any kind of environment that isn't just sort of a home user, but with all of the controls in place. That means you are making sure the right content is on the device, making sure it's filtered correctly, making sure it can be recovered, making sure security settings are correct. Again, very important for the police. So that was a really big, collaboration's been mentioned a couple of times now. So that was a really big collaborative effort between everybody involved, with us kind of sitting in the middle. And I think it's honestly one of the best environments that we have, because everyone was so bought into the process and getting it right. So from a personal perspective, it was a really, really good project to work on, because it's now you can see the fruits of it. And so the decisions now are, where does the apprenticeship go, as opposed to how do we make the technology work in a new direction. So that's my piece on that. But as you can probably tell, I was quite passionate about this project, and I just thought it was a really good experience from our side, as well as the consortium side. So that all in mind then, Darryll, I'm just checking how far we are through notes now. Could you give us an idea of the sort of the positive impacts that the iPad's made in the approach, in things like, when you're deploying technology in this way, you get various types of impacts. So you get intended impacts, i.e. the stuff you knew was going to happen and that's why you're doing it. Unintended impacts, i.e. things like, something came out of it that you weren't expecting, but is a positive thing as a result of having that technology in situ. And also things like evolved impacts, like now you know how this works and what it can do. How is that affecting your decisions going forward, and how you're going to craft the apprenticeship going forward?
So as I mentioned, we kind of deliberately designed all of the policing provision with a kind of work integrated approach in mind. So that meant that we were, rather than having, as I said, traditional kind of lectures and seminars and so forth in a lecture hall, we planned to have face-to-face, in-person masterclasses as kind of to stimulate learning for program modules, and then we would support that with online tutor supported sessions and access to various interactive learning materials as people would go. That was kind of basically the model that we planned, and we needed a mobile learning device to do that. We planned also that we would be able to use the mobile learning device for things like tripartite reviews, as I mentioned, and that was also really important. And then something happened called COVID, which
don't know what you're talking about. Never heard of it.
Which really challenged lots of people in lots of different ways. But the particular challenge for this was, of course, we'd set up and arrange that we would deliver these masterclasses at forced premises, arrange staff to travel and do all kinds of things. And then all of a sudden, because it wasn't safe, we couldn't do any of that. And that could potentially have been like, well, what do we do? Do we pause the program? Do the apprentices have to go on a break in learning? What do we need to do? So because we had kind of invested in the development of kind of a mobile learning, if you like, digital first kind of approach, we were able to completely seamlessly transfer what we planned as a physical face-to-face in-person session masterclass at a forced premise through to something that we would deliver through a mobile learning solution. So online, face-to-face, but not in person, and that was the difference. And we had to do that because we weren't allowed to have people meeting in rooms for obvious reasons. Yeah. So we developed and agreed a process and a policy with the forces about why we had to do that and how we would phase out of it and the various stages of doing that and so forth. And we found something quite surprising though, because we started delivering the online masterclasses and conducting more things online as a consequence of COVID. And we were starting to get feedback from the employers and the student officers. And the feedback was uniformly positive. Basically, they were telling us, we wanted this thing to be in person because that's what our normal police practice is. We sit people in a room, what they'd done previously with the previous police training, sit people in a room with a PowerPoint slide and say, all right, this is PowerPoint number 1, this is what you need to know, PowerPoint number 2, and off they go. I mean, I'm probably doing it a great disservice there, but it was roughly that kind of didactic kind of approach. So the kind of things that we developed was a quite a departure from that, but they were invested in that kind of in-person approach. And there are some aspects of police training that have to be in person, officer safety training, for example. So they've not lost sight of it completely. but the fact that we're able to deliver the masterclass sessions in particular online was being recognised by both the forces and the student officers as being a really positive development. So, for example, the fact that they could experience those things asynchronously, so they didn't have to be in the moment in the room. They could look at it at the time that fitted in with their shift patterns, had a knock-on effect. So it meant that rather than having to take a bunch of people out of a shift and put them in a room to engage with a masterclass, those same people could engage with that masterclass at a time that suited their particular shift pattern. That has a positive effect, knock-on effect, in terms of the kind of organisation of the force and the deployment of their student officers. So that was seen as a benefit operationally as well as kind of educationally. So they liked the interaction with the online environment. They saw the value of that, but there were operational kind of advantages to that as well. So on the basis of that, as a consortium and across the partnership with the police forces, we've discussed it and decided that we're not going to go back to the old normal. The original plan that we had, we're not going to do that because we've learned some things from having to respond to COVID. And we've learned that, having, the availability of asynchronous online masterclasses is seen as advantageous and creates an additional level of flexibility that wasn't there before. Even though it was very flexible before, it's even more flexible now because of what we've had to do. So we're not going to just put that in the bin and go back to what it was. We're going to learn from that and build that into what we're proposing to do going forward. And that's been a real. Had we not invested in mobile learning, solutions early on, then we wouldn't have been able to do that. If we had, predicated our provision on busing people to lecture halls, it would have had a major impact on the progress of apprentices. And for our apprentices and other learners, whilst of course, sadly some people have been affected by COVID, but aside from that, the people's progression on the programs has not been affected at all, which is pretty major in terms of when you're dealing with a global pandemic. There's been no effect on their progression in learning,
especially with police officers as well.
So I mean, it's a kind of amazing outcome in a way, and something that we have learned some valuable lessons from in terms of how we want to develop things kind of going forward. So we will now always kind of think, well, rather than thinking in person, we'll think, well, does that work in an online mobile learning solution first? That will be our first port of call. It's not saying that we won't want to do in-person things. There will be good reason for doing some things at times, but we will always make sure that we will have that facility available as our digital first, if you like, mindset, way of thinking.
Yeah, that's great to hear because, as you said, because you had the technology in place first, and you had this big challenge, as everybody in the world had that big challenge. Your concern obviously wasn't how do we make it work. It was the mechanism, as in it was more of a pedagogical decision than it was a technological decision, because the technology was there and it could do it. So the decision-making process was just how do the mechanics of this work, as opposed to how do we facilitate it. So I think that's great to hear. And as I said, this wasn't a project that was stuck in just before COVID or anything like that. It'd been going for a while, so that had enabled you guys to sort of pivot quite quickly, I think, from what I saw, certainly. Hence, not affecting the learning and the progression of all of the various apprentices involved. So out of that, then, how has that affected your thinking outside the police scheme? Are you going to apply those learnings to anything else, or is it just going to be sort of within the police apprenticeship?
Well, I mean, within policing, we've established a really fantastic partnership with our three police forces. I mean, they share a vision as well as much as the universities do, which is really great. So, that kind of the innovative potential of that partnership is huge, because there are lots of clever people in universities, but there are lots of clever people in police forces too. And you bring those two groups together, and you get an even cleverer result. So it's really powerful to bring those groups of people together. And so we've been thinking about different ways in which we can apply what we've learned. So we've been looking at in-service training for existing police officers. We've developed some upskilling programs for the police training staff. And the approaches that we've learned are feeding into the way in which we're developing that provision in partnership with the police forces. And it's in some organisations within the consortium have been delivering kind of in-service training for many years. But this has brought some impetus to a kind of really fresh thinking about what in-service training for police officers should be on the back of this experience. So that there are some significant impacts in terms of approaches to policing education more broadly outside of the contracts that we have, or building on the contracts that we have. Outside of policing, we've actually recently been we're in the process of conducting some sessions with nursing colleagues at Middlesex University. Because, certainly, for Middlesex, policing contracts are very big and nursing contracts are very big. It's two very important aspects of our provision, particularly within apprenticeships. And, whilst, nurses are operating in a different working environment, it is also a very complex working environment. And it has lots of similarly, demanding things that need to be brought to bear when thinking about how you can integrate on and off the job learning in the most effective way. So we're having a kind of a bit of a deep dive with professionals, bearing in mind all the professional requirements for becoming a registered nurse or a nursing associate, and thinking about what we might be able to put in place through a mobile learning device to best support that. And having done that with the police is an amazing advantage, because we've kind of done it with one professional area, and while this is a very different professional area, there are a lot of kind of transferable learnings that we can take from our policing experience. I mean, one thing in nursing, for example, is that there's something called a practice assessment document. This is so when nurses are in practice, they tend to and their training, they go on what we call spoke placements to different parts of hospitals or other healthcare settings, to learn what the requirements are from those settings, and they need to record and reflect on their experiences, and those things get reviewed by their employers and by tutors and so forth, and that becomes a record of their professional development that gets assessed. So currently, that's a Word document that they print out and they carry around to people and get signed. But there's work going on actually. We're involved in Middlesex with something called the Practice Learning Development Group across London, and there's development of an e-pad that they're calling it, and because it kind of obviously makes sense that you're talking about busy people, carrying around wads of paper under your arm with it's not necessarily the most efficient thing to do. So one of the things that we might be looking at is how we can use mobile learning devices to make that process much more streamlined and much more kind of digitally orientated. So there are other kind of, and then my personal vision is that at Middlesex anyway, every single apprentice that we have, they should have a mobile learning solution, because whilst their working contexts will all be different and we need to be responsive to those working contexts, they will need to be mobile with their learning, because they're in the workplace, they're not in the university. So the place actually needs to be taken out of the nature of our provision, And you can only do that if you enable people to have mobile learning solutions available to them. And I think that's really important for apprenticeship development more generally.
Yeah, I think you've touched on that a couple of times as well. It's like, if you think about what someone does in a job when they're, they've passed an apprenticeship and they're in full employment, they don't tend to go somewhere else to do a bit of, apart from certifications, obviously, but as part and parcel of the day to day, they don't really tend to go somewhere else to sit in a room to do some stuff and then come back. Granted, that's true for certain professions, but certainly the more vocational ones and the more sort of on the job professions, they just don't do that as much. So it makes complete sense to me having the learning environment while they're on that journey, being mobile with them and sort of giving them access to that information in situ, as opposed to sort of making them do something they wouldn't do once they're actually in the thick of it. So I find that, like, it seems like such an obvious thing, but it's not something that I don't think everybody thinks about, because there's such a traditional way of learning in a lot of institutions now. So I'm just conscious of time. We've got a few questions in, which is really awesome. So I'm just going to give everybody a couple of minutes to ask any more questions. I want to make sure we get through as many as we possibly can. We probably run over a little bit as well. But if you would put any other questions you have into the chat now, we'll come to them in a minute. And in the meantime, while people are doing that, Darryll, as a kind of a closing thought, what would you like to share? Is there anything else you'd like to share with any other colleagues in your sector that we haven't mentioned so far?
I think I'd like to emphasise, in this space, the collaborative advantage of partnership working with employers. Certainly people in universities are used to, the model of, an obscure professor going off into a darkened room and developing something and then bringing it out into the light and saying, here it is, isn't it wonderful, and hoping that people come and engage with it, That model doesn't really fit in this space, and actually isn't as productive and innovative as working in partnership, in close partnership with people who are engaged in everyday practice. The kind of the interaction between people who are, thinking about things, perhaps in a more abstract sense, with people who are thinking on a day-to-day basis in a more practical sense, putting, that together, is much more, likely to generate innovation than, just thinking from one perspective. So that's been really, really valuable. And the consortium, intends for us to be, thought leaders, I suppose, in terms of how policing education should be in this country and potentially internationally. Well, we can only do that by working in partnership with police forces. We couldn't have done it on our own, really. So that's really, really powerful. Another key thing for me is just thinking about the workplace as the primary site of learning, not seeing it as a place where knowledge is applied, but seeing it as the source of knowledge and also the source of learning opportunity more broadly. And that shifts your thinking in terms of pedagogy for this kind of provision. And I think that's what we've been able to do, with our kind of mobile learning solutions. But it takes a kind of mindset shift away from kind of traditional approaches to, taking some knowledge out of someone's head and delivering it to somebody. That isn't the model at all. It's much more kind of co-creative and co-designing learning opportunities. And one other specific thing for apprenticeships is that those meetings that I mentioned, those tripartite reviews between employers, university tutors and learners, that's emerging as what I would call a signature pedagogy for work integrated learning and apprenticeships in particular. It's not just a procedural thing. How are you doing? You're doing okay, ticking things off. It's not that. It's actually it's a very powerful way of promoting learning development between people who have different perspectives on that learning development and can contribute to identifying further opportunities for how learning can be maximized. So actually we're doing some research at the moment looking particularly at our policing provision to see how can we establish some kind of best practice guidance around tripartite reviews and how they can best support learning. And I envisage that mobile learning solutions will be an important part of that.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much for that. As I said to everybody at the start, it's really useful to get your brain time on all of this stuff. We've had a couple of comments saying the same thing. So awesome. Right. Are you ready to launch into some Q&A?
Yeah.
better get a drink of water quickly. Okay. So, the first question in was, do you allow the use of iPads for other personal/social aspects, or are they fairly locked down?
Okay. So they are controlled and contained. They're not a kind of person. They're not first and foremost a personal device. So they, but in order to meet the security requirements for the police forces, we've had white lists and black lists and things they can access and things they can't access. So they are professional learning mobile devices, if you like, first and foremost. Now that said, there will be things that they can access that there might be a personal interest to them, but those things will be controlled and contained by the kind of total managed solution that we have for them.
So no, they can't download Fortnite. That's basically the short version. Next one in is, if other colleagues at universities wanted to progress in a similar way to the consortium, could academia build a similar solution for them? That's a really easy one. I can answer that. Yes, absolutely. I think actually what's happened with what we do is it's been a bit of an evolution as part of working on this project. So we've developed a really good mechanism with the Police Education Consortium for delivering this kind of thing, and we've applied that in a number of different places. That being said, everything is contextual, so it's not like you have a solution in a box and that counts for every single person that you talk to, but all of the base stuff is there, all of the learnings are there. So yeah, absolutely. And I don't even think that was a pre-prepped question, so that was a good one to come out. So next one, does the consortium work with other universities also delivering the PCDA?
Yeah, so actually, Middlesex was involved in some research, out of which came something called the Centre for Degree Apprenticeships, which is hosted by UVAC, the University's Vocational Awards Council. And there have been a number of what's called knowledge network events from the Centre for Degree Apprenticeships that have focused on the police constable degree apprenticeships. I think there have been 3 meetings so far. So different university and other providers of the PCDA have got together to share practice and experience, and the consortium have contributed to some of those sessions already, and that's an ongoing kind of network of interested parties. So yes, we do engage. We also through APTEM, there is a APTEM higher education user group. And so people who are using the APTEM learner management system, and the policing provision has presented some challenges to us in terms of how that system works as well. So there's an ongoing kind of development piece there, and we engage with other universities in that way too.
Awesome. So the next...
I should also say. Sorry,
go on.
I should also say that there have been some research that's recently. So the Journal of Higher Education Skills and Work-Based Learning has recently had a special issue on public sector apprenticeships. And, there've been some work in that nursing I mentioned before, but also there's some stuff on policing in that. So yeah, we're kind of engaging with that in that kind of way as well with other organisations.
Very cool. So, this interesting next one. The police project is for circa 4,000 students. Could the same setup be achieved for smaller or larger sized cohorts, please? So that sounds like a request as well as a question. But I think it's a question about scalability. So is the cap 4,000 as far as you're concerned, or do you reckon that this would work just as well with a smaller cohort or a large cohort?
Yeah, I mean, the consortium wasn't set up to only work with 3 police forces necessarily. That's we're working with 3 fantastic police forces at present, and of course, so the fit. There have been some instances where the consortium was not bid for some provision because the way that the procurement has been set up would mean that the consortium approach would not fit, and so there are those potential instances. But as long as there's a kind of an appropriate fit between the force's vision and the consortium's vision, then yes, then we're in the business of sharing this practice, broadly. And in terms of scale, Yeah, there might be, the benefit of having a consortium is it's for university partners. So we can kind of deploy different university members of that consortium in different ways. So, for example, if there was a small local force that was, closer to one of the university partners, it might be that one university representing the consortium would work directly with that force rather than working across the whole of the consortium. So there are different models that can be kind of employed, but yes is generally the response.
Awesome. So, do you expect apprentices to use the iPad as a sole device or alongside a laptop or PC for typing assignments?
Well, they can use it as a sole device, but they can also, obviously, of course, use other devices that are available to them. We wanted to make sure that somebody could, complete the apprenticeship using that mobile learning device. So, and they could just use that. So there's nothing to stop them using other devices, but it is possible to complete the whole of the program using just that device. Now, some people you can get add-on devices, you can buy keyboards and so forth, and things that make that a more accessible experience. But you can do it just by using the iPad.
Awesome. So last couple now. Then we're nearly there. Don't worry. What spec iPads have been issued? Are they entry level or are they a different spec?
No, I think I can't remember exactly the number, to be honest with you, but I think they were certainly late versions. I don't know whether they're the very latest version, but they're certainly late versions. So there's in terms of the iOS system, there are no issues with certain apps not being able to be used and so forth. They're pretty up to date.
Yeah, and I think they're about mid-level storage from what I can remember, but this has been going on for a few years now, so there've been a couple of cycles with this stuff. So it's not like there's one specific thing throughout the board. But the other thing to bear in mind is they are Wi-Fi only devices at this point, but it would be entirely possible to do this with 4G devices as well, or SIM-based devices. At that point, when this was all kicking off originally, the technology wasn't quite there or quite right to do it in that way, but it's certainly something that could be done going forward. So I just wanted to call out that point. Oh, there we go. Colin's in the chat. There we go. Initially iPad 7th gen, 10.2 Wi-Fi, 32 gig, now on 8th gen. Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Colin. There's one question on here. What key app are used to deliver learning materials and content? So you've mentioned Aptem. Is there anything else that you guys use, or is it all centered around Aptem?
We are... Our use of Aptem is also something that's evolving. So at present, people access each university's virtual learning environment. They're registered with a particular university through the iPad, and sort of interactive learning materials are accessible through those virtual learning environments. However, what we've started to do is to use Aptem more broadly, so that the learning materials are imported into Aptem, so that it's helpful to sort of have a better handle on the consistency of the learning materials, because these things evolve, and if they're all evolving in 4 different ways, that's not helpful for consistency. So actually having it on a central system is helpful to maintain that consistency. So we're moving and we're phasing towards using Aptem more centrally as the point of access for using the learning materials that have been developed by the consortium. So that's our direction of travel, and we're some way down that track already.
Yeah, it all makes sense to have everything in a single pane of glass if you can. It's absolute consistency is key there, really. So final question then, unless any come in while we're going through this. How many people do you have managing the iPad? So that's going to be a different answer for you and for me. So in terms of how many people the consortium have, 0. There are people that will help with deployment and things on site, but that's actually more just literally getting a device out of the box and firing it up in the first instance. It's not like technical people as academia kind of manage the whole thing as part of the fully managed service. In terms of how many we have managing the iPad specifically, that's a bit of a tough equation because it's managed by our help desk. So across the board, we've got about 50 engineers across the group, but by no means does it take 50 engineers to do this kind of thing. Probably the more pertinent question there for me, rather than specifically how many people, it's the level of knowledge that needs to be acquired to do this efficiently. So we usually get asked, X amount of devices equals how many technicians. And it's not so much a question of that if you're doing everything with like a zero touch workflow, because there's not really as much hands on. What you're actually managing is change, and you're managing evolution, and you're managing updates and upgrades and things like that. So having people with sufficient training, right the way up to, we have Jamf integrators, Jamf 400 qualified people, means that those people can achieve more in a quicker way than people who haven't necessarily gone through those qualifications can do. So there's a bit of a balancing act between how many people does it take to manage it and what level of knowledge does it take to manage it efficiently. And that's kind of a sliding scale. And I know there's even, some of our customers have Jamf 400 qualified engineers. I probably should have mentioned earlier, we use Jamf for the MDM. So it can be as few as a couple of people, one person managing that many devices, but it depends entirely on what you're doing with them. So in terms of this particular project, that ends up on our help desk pool. And I'm sorry, I don't have a more specific answer for you than that, but it's not quite as easy to answer as that, unfortunately.
From the consortium's point of view, as I said, that we've outsourced that essentially. Now we have people that obviously really important people helping to manage our partnership with the police forces, and having a good handle on how the deployment of the iPads is working, whether there are any issues and so forth, is part and parcel of that. But directly kind of managing the iPads themselves, we don't have resource for that because we've outsourced it.
Yeah, there we go. Cool. I think that is it. I don't think I've missed any questions here. No, we're all good, and we've only just run over a little bit, which is good going for you and I, Darryll. I think we said before we could be doing a 2-hour one of these quite easily. So thank you everybody for joining. I hope you got a lot of value out of it. I know I have from talking to Darryll about this stuff and getting his insight. I'm just going to throw up an outro plate video with a bit of music and stuff. We'll hang around in chat for a few minutes afterwards if there's anything else you want to ask. Other than that, we'll be doing some follow-ups. Our marketing team will be doing some follow-ups with the recording of this webinar and the longer chat. Other than that, I think we're good. So thank you very much, Darryll. Much appreciated. And thank you, everybody, for joining.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Cheers.